They didn't. No. That sips the strange part. Not that they were cruel. Not that they were stupid. But that they were certain. Sile long breakouts. At 92, certainty is the one thing I distrust the most. As we've watched it ruin good people. As I've watched it harden gentle hands. I've watched it whisper, "You're safe now," right before the floor gave way. Be a breath. When you sit young, danger announces itself. It stirs loud. Obvious. It wears the costume you expect. But the danger I came talking about now, it arrives quietly. It smiles. It uses familiar words. Pause, long break. They didn't know. Because nothing felt wrong yet. The streets were still lit. The clocks still worked. People still planned vacations. Weddings. Retirements. Doctors still used reassuring tones. Leaders still spoke in careful optimism. Everything important seemed intact. Silence, long break here. I remember thinking, this is how it always is. This is how it will stay. That thought, that exact thought, has followed every collapse I've lived long enough to recognize. Be breath. At 92, you don't fear death the way others imagine. You fear misunderstanding. You fear realizing too late that what you protected most was never the thing that mattered. Paul Longbreak say, they didn't know because the warning signs didn't scream. They murmured. They blended into routine. They hid inside phrases like temporary, under control, nothing to worry about. Seal long breakance. I've seen nations say it. Families say it. I've said it myself. Standing in rooms where the air already felt thinner, where laughter arrived a second too late, to where silence lingered longer than it should. Be breath eat. At 92, memory becomes sharp in strange places. I don't remember every face, but I remember the moment before things changed. Not the disaster, not the collapse, but the calm just before, when everyone still believed tomorrow would look like yesterday. Poor Longbreak sea. They didn't know what they were standing on. They didn't know what they were trading away for comfort. They didn't know how expensive denial would become. Cylon, long breaks. And the most unsettling truth. If I hadn't lived this long, I wouldn't still have known either. Be breath it. Because the first sign that something is about to break isn't it chaos. It's its confidence. Paul Longbreak say. And that sips where the story really begins. With the moment everything still felt safe. Safety is a feeling, not a fact. That took me decades to understand. Back then, everything appeared reinforced. Institutions thick with tradition. Systems layered with procedure. People repeating the same routines like prayers. Morning coffee. Evening news. Promises spoken with practiced confidence. Be breath it. When something lasts long enough, we stop asking why it works. We just assume it always will. That assumption is seductive. It frees the mind. It dulls the instincts. Paul Longbreak say, I remember how calm everyone was. Calm not born of wisdom, but of repetition. We had been through worse. This isn't set new. People always overreact. History is filled with those sentences. They appear right before the pages turn dark. Empires used them. Banks used them. Families whispered them around hospital beds and dinner tables. Be breath it. Denial doesn't arrive as refusal. It arrives as reassurance. A soft hand on the shoulder. A chart that trends upward for now. A voice that says, statistically, you is fine. Pause long breaky. At 92, I can tell you something uncomfortable. The most dangerous moments in any life are when experts agree. Silent long break sea. Consensus creates sleep. Sleep creates delay. Delay creates damage. No one wants to be the first to say, this doesn't feel right, because saying that costs you something. Status, comfort, belonging. Be breath. Add. So people wait. They wait for permission to worry. They wait for undeniable proof. They wait for pain loud enough to justify fear. Pause long breaky. And while they wait, the structure weakens quietly. Tiny compromises. Small exceptions. Corners rounded for convenience. Nothing dramatic. Nothing headline-worthy. Sile long breakments. I've seen bridges collapse that way. Not from storms, but from neglect hidden behind confidence. I've seen relationships die the same way, and societies. Be breath at what fooled us most was how normal everything felt. Children still laughed. Markets still opened. Neighbors still argued about trivial things. Normalcy is powerful camouflage. Power long break sea. That's why the first warning sign is never an explosion. It is a pause. A delay that didn't just exist before. A question that doesn't yet get answered. A report, quietly revised. A conversation that ends too quickly. Sile long breakments. Most people noticed it. Few acknowledged it. Because admitting the first crack means accepting the possibility of collapse. And no one wants to live with that thought. Be breath at. So they chose comfort. They chose familiarity. They chose to believe the illusion. A little longer. How long break use? But illusions, once fractured, don't heal. They widen. And the crack they ignored was already spreading. Poor long break sea. The first cracks never arrive with urgency. They ask politely to be ignored. Still long breakins. At the time, no one called them cracks. That word comes later, after hindsight sharpens the edges. Back then, they were called exceptions, outliers, temporary disruptions. Be breath at. I remember the language changing before the reality did. Words softened, explanations lengthened. Sentences began ending with, but. How long breaks say? Yes, something failed, but it was isolated. Yes, people were uneasy, but they always are. Yes, the numbers shifted, but they stabilize. The mind loves a good but. It sets a bridge back to comfort. At 92, I've learned that every collapse is preceded by excellent vocabulary. Bulbathit. The signs were small enough to dismiss and frequent enough to normalize. A system that once responded instantly now needed reminders. A rule that was once firm became flexible. Just this once. A promise once spoken plainly now arrived, wrapped in conditions. None of it hurt yet. That's what made it dangerous. Silent breaths say. Pain educates quickly. Discomfort teaches nothing. Unless you stow willing to listen, most people aren't stuck. Be breath at. I watched intelligent, thoughtful people explain away what their instincts already understood. They cited precedent. They referenced authority. They compared this moment to worse ones that passed. History, misused, becomes a tranquilizer. Poor long break say. What they didn't notice was how often reassurance needed repeating. Truly stable things don't require constant explanation. Sile long breakments. At night when the noise faded, a few of us felt it. That low pressure in the chest. That sense of waiting for something unnamed. We didn't have evidence. Only unease. Be breath at. Unease is rarely respected. It doesn't arrive with data. It doesn't wear credentials. It just sits there, quietly insisting. How long break say? So we learned to talk over it. We stayed busy. We focused on surface problems. We joked about how tense everyone had become. Laughter is another form of denial. Say long breakins. And yet, the cracks kept spreading. Not outward, inward. Trust thinning. Patience shortening. Conversations growing careful. Be breathed. You could feel it in how people listened, waiting to respond instead of understand. In how decisions took longer, and accountability moved sideways. In how silence started to feel heavier than words. How long break say? Still, no alarms rang, because nothing had broken yet. So long break nance. That's just the cruel trick of early fractures. They hold just long enough to convince you they always will. But breath eat. We told ourselves there was time to adjust, Time to study. Time to wait. Pause long breaky. We were wrong about what time was doing. Because while we were watching the surface, the foundation was already shifting, and the next sound it made would be impossible to ignore. Pa long break use, the moment things become visible, is rarely the moment people accept them. Silent long break, sir. By then, the cracks have learned new shapes. They don't just hide anymore. They reorganize. What was once a quiet inconsistency becomes a pattern. What was once an exception demands a policy. Be breath. I remember the first time someone said, "This is serious." They said it calmly, almost apologetically, as if seriousness itself needed permission. Pause long breaky. Others responded the only way they knew how, by explaining why it wasn't sit. They gathered reports. They adjusted definitions. They reclassified the problem until it fit inside acceptable boundaries. Sile long break nonce. Denial evolves when pressure increases. It stops pretending nothing is wrong and starts insisting the wrong thing is necessary. Rebreath it. I've seen this in governments, in hospitals, in families trying to hold together something already failing. We don't have a choice. This is the best option available. We can step risk overreacting. Pause long breaky. Those phrases sound reasonable. They always do. Reason, when stripped of courage, becomes justification. Sile long break gnats. The human cost began showing itself in quiet ways. Fatigue that no one talked about. Faces that aged faster than time explained. Voices that lost their steadiness mid-sentence. Be breathed. People adapted, which is both our strength and our downfall. We normalize strain. We carry weight silently. We convince ourselves endurance is the same as safety. Poor breath see. But something had changed. Decisions now left a residue. No one felt clean afterward. Every solution created a new problem someone else would have to live with. Sile long break nonce. I watched good people compromise themselves, one reasonable step at a time. Not because they were cruel, but because the alternative felt unthinkable. We breathed. There is a moment in every escalation when the truth becomes too large to ignore and too frightening to face directly. The next hits when narratives harden. Heroes are invented. Enemies are named. Complexity is flattened into slogans. Prolonged break use. And those who raise concerns are no longer met with reassurance. They are met with irritation. Silent long break see. Now isn't that the time? Used to making it worse. Do you have a better solution? The room grows colder around them. Be breathed. At 92 I can tell you this. When urgency replaces honesty, mistakes stop being corrected and start being defended. Prolonged break use. The realization came quietly, like most unbearable truths. This wasn't a situation anymore. It was a direction, and we were already moving faster than we knew, toward a moment where choosing differently would no longer be possible. Pause. Every collapse has a moment that only becomes obvious afterward. Silence. At the time, it looks ordinary, administrative, even boring. A meeting, a vote, a signature placed carefully on paper. Beat. This is the moment people misunderstand the most. They imagine the point of no return as chaos, sirens, shouting, doors slamming shut. But that is instead how it happens. Pause. It happens when exhaustion wins, when everyone is too tired to argue, too invested to reverse course, too afraid of what admitting failure would cost. Silence. I remember thinking, if we just pause, just briefly, we could still turn this around. That thought came late. Later than it should have. Beat. The warning was there, clearer than all the earlier ones. Impossible to dismiss without effort. Numbers that no longer bent back. People who stopped pretending to believe. Consequences that arrived faster than explanations. Pause. Someone said it out loud. This will change things permanently. The room went quiet. Silence. No one argued. Not because they agreed, But because they understood, beat, understanding doesn't always lead to action. Sometimes it freezes you in place. Because action, now, meant sacrifice. Loss of reputation. Loss of comfort. Loss of the story we've just been telling ourselves. Pause. So a different question was asked. Not is this right, but can we survive it? Silence. That question sealed everything. At 92, I know this. The moment survival replaces integrity, the future narrows. Beat. The decision was made carefully, respectfully, with language designed to soften the blow. Words like necessary, measured, temporary, pause. None of them were true. Silence. The door didn't start slam. It closed quietly. So quietly that many didn't yet realize it had closed at all. Beat. By the time regret arrived, it arrived as memory. And memory, unlike choice, cannot be undone. Pause. What followed wasn't immediate disaster. That's the cruelest part. There was a delay, just long enough for people to believe they've been right all along. Silence. But beneath that fragile calm, something essential had already been lost, and it would soon demand to be paid for in full. Pause. Collapse rarely announces itself as collapse. Silence. It arrives disguised as confusion, as delay, as quiet questions no one can answer anymore. People wake up expecting continuity, and instead find gaps. Gaps in services. Gaps in trust. Gaps in one another. Beat. At first, everyone assumes it's temporary. A glitch. A backlog. A rough transition that will smooth itself out. Pause. But the days don't smooth. They stretch. Silence. Information stops lining up. What you told in the morning contradicts what you experience by evening. Plans become provisional. Promises acquire footnotes. Silence starts doing most of the talking. Beat. Fear doesn't just arrive as panic. It arrives as caution. People stop volunteering opinions. Stop asking certain questions. Stop making long-term plans. Pause. Hope shrinks quietly. Silence. I remember the sound changing. Rooms felt different. Crowds moved differently. Even footsteps seemed hesitant, as if the ground itself had become untrustworthy. Beat. Some people adapted quickly. They learned the new rules, spoken and unspoken. They adjusted expectations downward and called it realism. Pause. Others couldn't just. They carried the weight visibly. Their confusion turned inward. Their anger had nowhere safe to land. Silence. That's when the real cost emerged. Not in headlines, not in statistics, but in exhaustion. The beat. A deep, moral exhaustion. The kind that comes when effort no longer leads to improvement, only maintenance. When every day feels like holding something together that keeps slipping anyway. Pause. Communities didn't explode. They thinned. Neighbors stopped checking in. Conversations shortened. Empathy became selective. Silence. People conserved themselves, and in doing so, lost pieces they wouldn't get back. Beat. At 92, I have learned this truth. Collapse isn't satching loud. It's a long, quiet subtraction. Less trust, less patience, less belief that tomorrow will reward honesty. Pause. By the time people named what was happening, they were already living inside it. Silence. The question was no longer, how did this happen? It was, how much more can we lose? And still recognize ourselves. Beat. And no one yet understood that the emptiness they felt was only the beginning, because what comes after collapse is not chaos. It's his reckoning. Pause. After collapse, there is a strange stillness, silence, not peace, not relief, just absence. The absence of certainty, the absence of momentum, the absence of the future people once spoke about so casually. Beat. What remains looks deceptively familiar. The same buildings, the same names, the same routines, performed more slowly now, with less conviction. Pause. At 92, I recognize this phase clearly. It sits when people begin sorting memory from myth, silence. They replay moments, conversations, decisions that once felt small. They ask questions they didn't yet have the courage or the language to ask at the time. Why didn't we stop? Why didn't we wait? Why did we trust the wrong voices? Beat. Regret doesn't arrive as despair. It arrives as clarity. Pause. And clarity is brutal, because it strips away excuses. It exposes the difference between what was unavoidable and what was merely unchallenged. Silence. I watched people grieve things no one had officially declared lost. A version of themselves. A sense of moral footing. The belief that good intentions were enough. Beat. Some tried to rewrite the past. They reframed choices as inevitabilities. They edited out hesitation. They smoothed the story until it no longer accused them. Pause. Others couldn't state. They carried the weight openly, in quieter voices, in longer pauses, in eyes that no longer looked away. Silence. That sits when realization settles in. Not all at once, not evenly, but deeply. Beat. We didn't fail because we lacked information. We failed because we postponed courage. We waited for certainty. In a moment that demanded judgment. Pause. At 92, this is the part that hurts most. Knowing that nothing dramatic would have been required. Just a pause. Just refusal. Just enough people saying, no, this isn't set right. Silence. The aftermath isn't instinct about punishment. This is about inheritance. What the next generation receives. Not in material terms, but in moral condition. Beat. They inherit our silence, our compromises, our unfinished apologies. And as the weight of that understanding grows, one final question begins to surface. Not about the past, but about whether anyone, this time, will listen. If you're still listening to this, then the story isn't still finished. Sile long break months. That sips the uncomfortable truth. Nothing I've described belongs only to the past. It never does. Patterns don't retire. They wait. Be breathed. At 92, I don't speak from prediction. I speak from recognition. I recognize the language. I recognize the reassurances. I recognize the way unease is mocked, until it becomes unavoidable. Paul Longbrake say, you are closer to a choice than you think. Not a dramatic one, not a heroic one, a quiet one. Silence Longbreaky, the choice to pause when you're so told to hurry. The choice to question when consensus feels comforting. The choice to protect what feels fragile instead of what feels familiar. Be breath that they didn't know, because they trusted continuity more than conscience. They believed stability was permanent, and warning signs were optional. You don't have that excuse anymore. Sion long break say. You've seen how denial sounds, how it moves, how it justifies itself. You've felt the weight of waiting for certainty that never comes. Be bare breath. The future doesn't break all at once. It erodes, one reasonable decision at a time. Long break oars. So listen carefully to what unsettles you. Pay attention to what steps being rushed. Notice what requires silence to survive. Cylon long break sea. At 92, this is the final truth I can offer you. History doesn't punish ignorance. It punishes delay. Beat breath. And the most dangerous moment is not when everything falls apart. Pause long breaky. It sits when everything still looks normal, and you decide to look away.